What if the entire foundation of a royal fairy tale rested on a single lie? Imagine the picture-perfect announcement. A glowing couple, a newborn child wrapped in pristine white, and the world's cameras flashing to capture what seemed like a joyous moment of continuity in the House of Windsor. Now imagine that moment wasn't what it seemed at all, that beneath the royal smiles and choreographed charm, there was a secret so explosive it could unravel not just a marriage, but the very credibility of the monarchy itself. That's exactly the shadow hanging over Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and their son Archie Harrison. Because according to whispers that have now erupted into full-blown accusations, DNA tests tell us something shocking. Meghan Markle may not be the biological mother of Archie. And if that's true, then everything we thought we knew about the royal family's most controversial couple could come crashing down. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why does this matter so much? Because in the world of royalty, bloodlines are everything. They are the crown's currency, the invisible glue binding centuries of power, privilege, and prestige. Royals don't just have children. They produce heirs, the next in line to a throne that represents an entire nation's identity. If Meghan Markle is not Archie's biological mother, then the questions don't stop at the nursery door. They spiral outward. What does this mean for Harry? For Archie's future? For the monarchy's fragile credibility in an era when public trust is already hanging by a thread? Let's not sugarcoat it. From the moment Meghan and Harry announced Archie's birth, something felt off. Royal births traditionally follow a very specific playbook. Cameras outside the hospital. Doctors' bulletins. A beaming couple presenting the newborn to the world within hours of delivery. We saw it with Diana and Charles. We saw it with William and Catherine. But when it came to Meghan, silence, delay, odd restrictions. No traditional photos outside the hospital. No transparent medical briefings. Instead, a carefully staged reveal days later, in a sterile Windsor Castle hallway, with Meghan in a pristine white dress that left people wondering, was this really a woman who had just given birth? The public didn't miss those details. They noticed the missing hospital photos. They noticed the contradictory stories about where and when Meghan supposedly went into labor. They noticed that while Meghan claimed to have been at Portland Hospital in London, there were no staff sightings, no fellow mothers recalling her presence, no traditional royal medical team statements. In an institution obsessed with record-keeping and protocol, this absence of evidence became evidence of absence. And for skeptics, it opened the door to a question few dared to ask aloud at the time. Was Meghan ever pregnant at all? Now, fast forward. DNA whispers begin to surface. At first, it was dismissed as the usual noise of conspiracy theorists. But then insiders started pointing to inconsistencies that couldn't be explained away by tabloids alone. Sources close to the palace leaked stories of sealed medical files. Former staff members hinted at behind-the-scenes panic when questions about the birth record were raised. And eventually, according to those who claim to have seen the documents, DNA test results emerged, results that suggest Archie does not carry Meghan's genetic signature. Pause for a second and really think about that. If a DNA test, the most scientifically definitive tool we have, says Meghan isn't Archie's biological mother, then what was the palace hiding? Was surrogacy involved? Was another woman the biological mother? And if so, why the secrecy? Was this Meghan's decision, Harry's, or was it orchestrated by the monarchy itself to preserve appearances? The secrecy becomes even more suspicious when you compare Meghan's supposed pregnancy with other royal pregnancies. Kate Middleton, for instance, faced hyperemesis gravidarum, severe morning sickness, that kept her out of the public eye, but her condition was acknowledged and explained by the palace. Every bump, every detail, every doctor's statement was scrutinized and documented. Meghan, by contrast, seemed to float through pregnancy without the transparency expected of a royal consort. She made appearances, yes, but often in outfits that seemed oddly inconsistent with the timeline of pregnancy stages. One day, a noticeable bump. The next, a much smaller one. The speculation that Meghan was wearing a prosthetic moon bump wasn't confined to online forums. It seeped into mainstream conversations. Now, here's where it gets even more dramatic. The palace, instead of quashing the rumors with hard evidence, doubled down on secrecy. No open access to medical staff. No transparency about the birth certificate until weeks later, and even then, strange edits were made to the document. Why edit a royal birth certificate unless there was something to hide? Every action that was meant to assure the public only raised more questions. And that brings us back to why this matters now. In a monarchy already battered by scandal, Prince Andrew's disgrace, Charles's fragile reign, William and Harry's bitter feud, the revelation that Meghan may not be Archie's biological mother could be the most destabilizing blow yet. Because this isn't just about Meghan. It's about legitimacy. It's about whether Archie can be considered a true Windsor. It's about whether Harry's marriage was built on a foundation of love or manipulation. It's about whether the monarchy, already accused of lying and covering up scandals, has once again tried to play the public for fools. But here's the question I want you to wrestle with. If Meghan truly wasn't Archie's biological mother, why go through such an elaborate charade? Was it to maintain her public image as the royal who completed Harry's family? Was it to secure Archie's position in the line of succession, ensuring that even if Meghan wasn't blood, her child would be? Or, here's the darkest twist of all, was Meghan herself used, perhaps willingly, perhaps unwillingly, as a public face for a child whose true origins were carefully hidden for reasons only the palace understands? These aren't just idle questions. They cut to the heart of the monarchy's survival. Because the monarchy doesn't thrive on democracy or popularity, it thrives on bloodline. If Archie's lineage is compromised, it doesn't just make Meghan look deceptive. It makes the monarchy itself complicit in deception. And in an era where people are already questioning whether the crown has any place in modern society, one more lie could be the death knell. So let's strip away the smoke and mirrors. Let's dig into the contradictions, the silenced voices, the missing records, the DNA revelations that have shaken not just Meghan and Harry, but the monarchy itself. Because this isn't just gossip. This isn't just a scandal. This is about truth, about trust, about whether the story of Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor is the monarchy's proudest chapter or its most shameful cover-up. But remember, every cover-up leaves clues, and every secret eventually demands to be exposed. The DNA test may have opened the door, but what lies beyond that door could shatter the royal family in ways they never imagined. Because the test doesn't just confirm what many suspected. It forces us to confront the question. If Meghan isn't Archie's biological mother, then who is? And why has the palace worked so hard to keep that answer hidden? What comes next isn't just speculation. It's the untold story behind the story, the whispers that grew into accusations, the silenced insiders who finally spoke, and the evidence that points toward one inevitable conclusion. The truth was never what it seemed. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the first cries of a royal baby aren't followed by the sound of flashing cameras? What happens when the birth of a child meant to symbolize continuity instead becomes the spark of suspicion? That's exactly what unfolded the moment Meghan and Harry introduced Archie Harrison to the world. And it wasn't just the absence of tradition that raised eyebrows. It was the way the entire event seemed shrouded in a fog of contradictions. Let's rewind to that spring day in May 2019. The world was waiting for history to repeat itself. The grand spectacle of a royal birth. Crowds lined the streets. Reporters set up camp outside hospitals, ready for the iconic balcony wave or the proud parents walking out with their newborn in their arms, much like Diana and Charles with William, or William and Catherine with their 3 children. That's what the public had come to expect. That's what tradition demanded. But when Meghan went into labor, or at least when we were told she did, the script changed. Suddenly, we weren't watching live updates from St. Mary's Hospital. There were no doctors giving medical statements. There wasn't a formal bulletin on the gates of Buckingham Palace with the Queen's approval. Instead, a strange silence. Hours passed. Then, oddly, Buckingham Palace released a statement saying Meghan had gone into labor, only to later reveal Archie had already been born earlier that morning. How could the palace be announcing labor when the baby was already here? That contradiction was the first red flag. And people noticed. Was it an innocent communication slip, or was it deliberate misdirection? Because in the royal world, every detail is choreographed down to the minute. So why would they fumble something as important as this? And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Traditionally, royal births are attended by the royal gynecologist, the same trusted medical professionals who handled births for decades. Yet Meghan reportedly rejected them, opting for her own private team. On the surface, that might seem like a simple choice. But in the palace? That's unheard of. Why reject the system that guaranteed transparency? Unless, of course, you didn't want transparency. Think about how William and Catherine handled it. Despite Catherine's intense health struggles during pregnancy, they still stuck to tradition. They appeared outside St. Mary's mere hours after childbirth, Catherine in heels and a dress, smiling through the exhaustion. Was it demanding? Absolutely. But it reassured the public that everything was real, authentic, visible. Meghan and Harry, by contrast, did the opposite. They hid. They controlled. They staged. Their reveal of Archie days later at Windsor Castle wasn't just unusual, it was theatrical. A sterile, almost surreal hallway scene. Meghan in a flawless white dress, hair perfect, heels clicking confidently on the marble. No signs of postpartum exhaustion. No swollen features. No hospital wristband. Just a radiant woman walking as though she'd stepped off a photo shoot. And here's the contradiction. While Meghan insisted she'd given birth, the image she presented contradicted the raw reality most mothers, and indeed, most royals, show after delivery. And here's where I ask you directly, doesn't it strike you as odd? Doesn't it feel too polished, too rehearsed? Almost like they were playing roles in a production rather than living out the raw chaos of parenthood? Observers couldn't help but compare Meghan's postpartum look to Diana's vulnerability outside the hospital or Kate's fragile but determined smiles. Meghan's reveal felt off-script, too perfect. And when something feels too perfect in the royal family, it's usually hiding something imperfect beneath. Then came the missing details. Hospital staff, who normally would have spoken about the honor of delivering a royal baby, remained silent. No fellow mothers remembered seeing Meghan at Portland Hospital. No medical personnel came forward to confirm. In fact, it was only weeks later that the birth certificate even emerged, and even that document raised questions. At first, Meghan's name appeared. Later, it was reportedly edited out, replaced with Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Why edit such a basic document unless there was more to the story? And if you think that's strange, consider this. Even the announcement of the birth was delayed in a way that made no sense. Reporters claimed they were notified late. The timing didn't align. By the time the palace confirmed Meghan was in labor, Archie was already here. Almost as if the palace was trying to cover for an event they couldn't fully control. Add to that Meghan's pregnancy appearances. Remember the infamous moon bump debates? On one occasion, Meghan was filmed bending down with her belly seemingly shifting in ways that didn't look natural. On another, her bump appeared larger or smaller depending on the outfit and day. Was this simply camera angles and fabric tricks, or was there more to it? Was Meghan wearing a prosthetic bump to maintain an illusion? If so, why? For many, the inconsistencies piled too high to ignore. And yet, the palace remained silent. No clarifications, no corrections, just vague statements and a carefully controlled narrative. But silence, in this case, wasn't golden, it was damning. Because every unanswered question became a breeding ground for suspicion. This wasn't just about Meghan and Harry being private parents. This was about a centuries-old institution breaking its own traditions to shield a couple from scrutiny. And when traditions break, people ask why. Was Meghan truly unable to carry Archie? Was surrogacy involved? And if so, why hide it? Plenty of women, even royals, use surrogates openly. Why cloak it in secrecy unless the palace feared the truth would undermine Archie's place in the royal family? The birth announcement didn't just fail to reassure the public. It triggered a chain reaction of doubt. A baby meant to unite the family with joy instead opened cracks in the foundation. Every missing detail became a shadow. Every contradiction, a spotlight. And the more the palace tried to control the narrative, the less believable it became. But if the birth announcement itself was strange, the story only got darker when people started asking, what about the medical records? Because if those files told the real story, then the palace had every reason to keep them hidden. And that, my friends, is where the whispers turn into full-blown alarm bells. Because once you start digging into the missing medical records, you find yourself staring into a void of silence where truth should be. And in that void lies the next shocking revelation, one that even the palace couldn't erase. Let's begin with a simple truth. Every royal birth in modern history has been carefully documented, not just for tradition's sake, but for transparency. When Diana gave birth to William and Harry, when Kate delivered George, Charlotte, and Louis, medical bulletins were posted on palace gates, signed by royal doctors whose names were etched into history alongside those of the heirs they delivered. There was no room for doubt. The papers were there. The doctors were present. The evidence was sealed in black and white. But with Meghan? Silence. Secrecy. Shadows. According to palace insiders, no official medical bulletin signed by the traditional royal physicians was ever released. Instead, the public was given a vague statement. The Duchess of Sussex has been delivered of a son. Delivered by whom? When exactly? Where? Those details were deliberately left blank. And when the press pressed for more, the palace clammed up. Why? Was it a privacy decision or a cover-up? The strange thing is, Meghan's chosen hospital, Portland Hospital in London, is not some obscure clinic. It's one of the most high-profile private maternity hospitals in the UK, known for hosting celebrities and aristocrats alike. Mothers who deliver there are often proud to speak of the care, the staff, the luxury. And yet, in Meghan's case, a blanket of silence covered everything. No staff stepped forward to share even the most sanitized anecdote. No official doctors appeared before cameras. It was as if Meghan had slipped into the hospital in the dead of night, left unnoticed, and departed with a newborn. An almost impossible scenario in such a scrutinized environment. But here's where it gets even more puzzling. Weeks after Archie's birth, rumors began circulating that staff at Portland Hospital had been asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. NDAs aren't unusual for celebrities, but for a royal birth? It's unheard of. Why muzzle the very people who could confirm the truth? Unless, of course, the truth wasn't what the palace wanted the world to hear. Now let's dive deeper into the records themselves, or rather, the lack of them. In most royal births, the attending doctors issue a formal statement. Their names are recorded. Their credentials checked. The medical certificates are part of the permanent record. But when journalists requested access to Archie's medical documentation, they ran into a brick wall. Hospital administrators declined to comment. The palace refused to release details. Even the official birth certificate raised questions. On Archie's birth certificate, for example, Meghan's name was listed as Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. But strangely, weeks later, her first names were removed, leaving only the royal title. The palace tried to brush this off as a clerical change, but critics saw it as something more sinister, a manipulation of records designed to obscure Meghan's connection, or perhaps lack thereof, to Archie's birth. Why alter a document that should have been straightforward? Ask yourself, if everything were legitimate, wouldn't the palace have every incentive to present those records proudly, to silence the rumors once and for all? Instead, the opposite happened. The harder the press and public pushed for answers, the tighter the palace sealed the vault. And in doing so, they only fueled speculation that there was something to hide. And here's the contradiction that stings the most. Meghan and Harry often spoke about wanting transparency, about breaking free from the shadowy ways of the royal institution. Yet when it came to the one event that could have proven beyond doubt that Archie was Meghan's biological child, they chose secrecy. They chose silence. They chose to hide the very documents that could have put every rumor to bed. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that suspicious? Some skeptics began comparing Meghan's case to surrogacy arrangements, where medical records are often sealed to protect the identities of those involved. Could that explain why no doctors came forward, why no detailed bulletins were released, why edits were made to the birth certificate? Could it be that Meghan was never the patient at all, but the public face for a pregnancy carried out by another woman behind closed doors? If that's the case, then the missing records aren't just missing, they're incriminating. They aren't gaps in paperwork. They're deliberate erasures designed to conceal the truth. But there's more. One nurse, whose identity was never revealed publicly, allegedly confided to a journalist that she had been at Portland Hospital during the time Meghan claimed to have delivered Archie. According to her, there was no trace of Meghan on the patient list that day. No high-profile security presence. No royal entourage. Nothing to suggest a duchess was giving birth. The story was buried. Of course, the journalists silenced under pressure. But even whispers like this add fuel to the fire. Think about it. In an age where nothing escapes social media, not a single fellow patient, not a single visitor, not a single staff member posted about Meghan's supposed presence at the hospital. Compare that to Kate, where bystanders, staff, and even passers-by couldn't resist sharing their proximity to the royal birth. Why the total blackout for Meghan? Coincidence? Or coordinated suppression? And this is where the emotional weight hits hardest. Because at the heart of all these contradictions is a child. A child who didn't ask to be born into this storm, yet finds himself at the center of questions about legitimacy, truth, and deception. Archie Harrison is innocent, but the adults around him, the palace, Meghan, Harry, are the ones responsible for creating this cloud of suspicion. Now let's ask the question no one dares to say aloud. If the medical records were sealed, if staff were silenced, if the birth certificate was altered, what exactly was the palace trying to protect? Was it Meghan's image as a modern, glamorous mother? Was it Archie's status in the line of succession? Or was it something deeper, something that could shake the monarchy to its core? Because here's the chilling reality. Once you accept that the medical records were manipulated or concealed, you have to accept the possibility that the truth of Archie's birth is not what we were told. And that opens a Pandora's box of questions that the palace would do anything to keep closed. But boxes don't stay closed forever. Secrets leak. And once the rumors of surrogacy began to spread, they couldn't be contained. Because when people realized the medical records didn't exist or couldn't be trusted, they turned to the next logical question. If Meghan didn't give birth to Archie, then who did? And that, my friends, is where the story takes its darkest turn. Because once surrogacy whispers began, they weren't just whispers anymore. They became a storm. And the palace found itself battling the very narrative it had tried so hard to suppress. But the surrogacy rumors weren't just speculation. They were fueled by inconsistencies that multiplied with every passing week. And when those rumors took root, they threatened to expose the one truth the palace never wanted revealed. What happens when whispers become echoes, and echoes become a chorus too loud to ignore? That's exactly what unfolded when the word surrogacy began creeping into conversations about Meghan Markle's supposed pregnancy. At first, it was a fringe idea, murmured in online forums and speculative corners of social media. But soon, it wasn't just anonymous accounts stirring the pot. It was seasoned royal watchers, journalists, and even former insiders who began to admit something didn't add up. And that's when the surrogacy rumors took root. Let's rewind to the days before Archie's birth. Meghan was making appearances, her baby bump on full display. Cameras followed her every step, just as they had with Diana and Kate before her. But here's where the contradictions began. One day, Meghan's bump looked enormous, stretched taut beneath a fitted dress. Another day, it appeared much smaller, barely visible under looser clothing. A natural fluctuation? Maybe. But then came the moment that sent shockwaves across the internet. The infamous moon bump video. In this clip, Meghan bends down to greet someone. As she crouches, her bump appears to shift unnaturally, folding in ways no biological bump should. The footage spread like wildfire, sparking debates everywhere. Was it just a trick of the fabric? Or was Meghan wearing a prosthetic pregnancy belly? And if so, why? Think about it. Why would a royal duchess, married to the Queen's grandson, feel the need to fake a pregnancy bump? Was it vanity, a desire to control her public image? Or was it something far more calculated? An elaborate performance designed to maintain an illusion while a surrogate carried the child in secret? Now, some of you might be thinking, surrogacy isn't scandalous. Many women, unable to carry children, turn to surrogates. It's a valid, respected path to parenthood. But here's the thing. This is the royal family we're talking about. A monarchy obsessed with bloodlines, lineage, tradition. Admitting to surrogacy could undermine the image of continuity they so desperately cling to. For Meghan and Harry, it could spark questions about Archie's legitimacy as a royal heir. For the palace, it could fuel accusations of deception and manipulation. And that's why, if surrogacy was indeed involved, the decision wasn't just personal, it was political. Insiders began to whisper that Meghan had been working with a private agency in London known for high-profile surrogacy arrangements. According to these whispers, the surrogate was carefully chosen, her identity sealed by legal agreements thicker than any royal contract. Payments, it was alleged, were funneled through shell accounts, disguised as consulting fees or charitable donations. Convenient, isn't it, that money trails vanish just when the truth matters most? And here's where the palace's behavior becomes even more suspicious. Normally, surrogacy within aristocratic circles isn't unheard of, but it's often acknowledged quietly, explained with grace, and accepted. Yet with Meghan, there was no acknowledgement, only secrecy. Why go to such great lengths to deny what could have been explained? Unless, of course, the denial was essential to preserve the illusion that Archie was Meghan's biological child. The surrogacy rumors grew stronger after the birth announcement fiasco. The missing hospital staff statements, the altered birth certificate, the sterile Windsor reveal. Each strange detail reinforced the idea that Meghan had never actually carried Archie. And then came the testimonies of those who claimed to have seen her in private during the pregnancy. One friend allegedly remarked, "She looked radiant, but I couldn't help noticing her body didn't change the way you'd expect." Another insider suggested Meghan avoided situations where physical closeness might expose inconsistencies. Was she protecting her privacy or protecting a secret? Ask yourself this. If Meghan truly gave birth, why not silence the surrogacy rumors with medical proof? Why not release the names of attending doctors, as royal tradition dictates? Why not share even a single candid, verifiable moment from the delivery? Instead, every opportunity for clarity was replaced by silence, edits, or carefully staged photo ops. And silence, in the court of public opinion, speaks volumes. It wasn't long before journalists began to pick up the threads. Tom Bower, Lady C, and other royal biographers hinted at anomalies in Meghan's pregnancy story. Some stopped short of saying surrogacy outright, but their carefully chosen words, unusual, mysterious, unprecedented secrecy, fueled speculation. And when seasoned commentators, not just anonymous voices online, began hinting at the same thing, the rumors gained credibility. Even Meghan's own behavior seemed to play into it. Remember her interviews about motherhood? Her descriptions of labor and delivery often sounded rehearsed, almost detached, as if she were reading from a script. Contrast that with Diana's raw accounts or Kate's relatable admissions about the pain and exhaustion. Meghan's answers often felt too polished, too clinical. Was it nerves? Or was it the difficulty of describing an experience she never actually had? But perhaps the most damning element came from within the palace itself. Former staff members, speaking off the record, suggested they were instructed never to ask questions about Meghan's pregnancy. One aide reportedly said, "We were told to celebrate, but never probe." Any curiosity was shut down immediately. Does that sound like the behavior of a family confident in the truth? Or does it sound like the frantic control of a narrative threatening to unravel? Here's the irony. Meghan and Harry presented themselves as truth-tellers, rebels exposing the hypocrisy of the monarchy. And yet, if the surrogacy rumors are true, they were the ones orchestrating the most elaborate deception of all. Isn't it ironic that the couple who accused the palace of lying might themselves have been living a lie all along? But let's pause here and confront the emotional core of this. If Meghan did use a surrogate, is that wrong in itself? Absolutely not. The wrongness lies not in the surrogacy, but in the secrecy, in the deception, in presenting a global fairy tale while allegedly hiding the reality. Because when you build a brand on authenticity, but trade in illusions, the betrayal cuts deep. And the betrayal wasn't just against the public. It was against Harry himself, if we believe the whispers that he was shielded from certain truths until too late. Imagine discovering that the woman you love, the mother of your child, may not have been honest about the very foundation of your family. How would you react? Would you cling tighter to the illusion, or would you let the cracks widen into a chasm? That's the tension at the heart of this saga. A tension that only grew when people realized the surrogacy rumors weren't dying. They were spreading. Because every time Meghan appeared in public, every photo of her bump, every carefully staged moment, became evidence to fuel the theory. And when DNA whispers began to circulate years later, those surrogacy rumors looked less like gossip and more like prophecy. So here's the cliffhanger. If Meghan didn't carry Archie, then who did? Who was the woman chosen to play the role of surrogate, hidden from the world while Meghan took the spotlight? And what happened to her after the birth? Because the midwife wasn't the only one who vanished from this story. the surrogate herself may have left behind clues. And those clues lead us straight into the next chapter of this exposé. What happens when the one person who could confirm everything, every detail of a birth, every contraction, every final push, suddenly disappears from the story altogether? That's where we land now. Because in the tangled mystery of Archie Harrison's birth, one figure looms larger in absence than in presence. The midwife who was supposed to have been there, but who seems to have vanished without a trace. Think about this. In every royal birth of the modern era, medical staff have played not just a practical role, but a symbolic one. They are witnesses, guardians of truth, the people who sign the paperwork that says, yes, this child was born here, to this mother, on this day. Their names go down in history alongside the names of kings and queens. But with Meghan's pregnancy, no such names, no such records, just silence. And that silence became deafening when rumors began to circulate that a midwife had been present, but that her story was quickly buried. And so, perhaps, was she. Here's what insiders whispered. There was a nurse midwife at Portland Hospital who claimed involvement, or at the very least proximity, to Meghan's supposed delivery. Her colleagues allegedly recalled her being assigned to a VIP case in early May 2019. But shortly after Archie's birth, she was gone. Not just gone from the hospital, but gone from the country. Relocated, retired, or silenced. No one can say for sure. Ask yourself. If the birth had been straightforward, legitimate, and in line with tradition, why would anyone connected to it need to vanish? Why wouldn't this midwife have proudly shared, even in the most generic terms, the honor of helping deliver a royal baby? Instead, what we hear are whispers of gag orders, threats of losing pensions, and the quiet shuffle of a professional being pushed out the door. This isn't how the monarchy usually operates. In William and Kate's case, Sir Marcus Secchell and Guy Thorpe Beeston, the royal gynecologists, proudly lent their names to official bulletins. Their reputations were cemented by history. Yet in Meghan's case, the medical professionals remain shadows, unnamed, unreachable, silent. And silence, as we've seen again and again, is the mother of suspicion. Now, here's the twist that makes the story even more haunting. Some journalists claim to have tracked down relatives of this supposed midwife. One, speaking off the record, allegedly said, "She couldn't talk about what she saw. Not then, not now. It wasn't safe." Safe? Why wouldn't it be safe to talk about delivering a healthy royal baby? Unless what she saw wasn't what the palace wanted the world to believe. And think of the emotional toll. Imagine being a midwife sworn to care for mothers and babies, only to find yourself caught in a political storm. Do you tell the truth and risk everything? Your career, your safety, your family's peace? Or do you keep quiet, bury what you know, and live with the weight of a secret that could topple a monarchy? This is where the contradictions pile up. Meghan, in interviews, painted a glowing picture of Archie's birth, describing it as magical, serene. Yet the very people who should have been witnesses are absent. No official records. No staff stepping forward. And now, the strange disappearance of a midwife who might have been the only impartial truth-teller in the entire ordeal. Doesn't that strike you as more than coincidence? And let's not forget, Portland Hospital is private, but it is not invisible. Staff there are used to handling high-profile cases, from celebrities to royals. They know discretion, yes, but they also know protocol. NDAs might silence a receptionist, but midwives, doctors, their names usually end up on certificates, bulletins, historical documents. Their absence isn't just strange, it's suspicious. One theory suggests the midwife's disappearance was orchestrated not just to silence her, but to erase her role entirely. If Meghan never gave birth at Portland, then perhaps this midwife wasn't present at a delivery, but was present at something else. Something the palace couldn't risk the world knowing about. Perhaps she saw the surrogate. Perhaps she facilitated a handover rather than a delivery. And if that's true, then her silence isn't voluntary, it's enforced. Ask yourself this. In a monarchy built on tradition, why break with the most basic traditions of all? Naming the doctors, celebrating the midwives, honoring the truth? Unless breaking tradition was the only way to keep the secret safe. This isn't just a bureaucratic oversight. It's a missing piece of a puzzle. And in puzzles, missing pieces usually mean one of two things. They were lost accidentally, or they were hidden deliberately. Given the stakes here, which do you think it is? And yet, the more you dig, the stranger it gets. Because if the midwife vanished, who else knew? Were other staff silenced? Did hospital administrators receive guidance from the palace to bury records and shuffle staff around? Was money exchanged to ensure compliance? Some sources allege hush payments were made, not just to staff, but to agencies specializing in confidentiality agreements. If true, that suggests an organized, deliberate effort to erase witnesses from the official story. And here's the bitter irony. The monarchy, an institution obsessed with preserving history, may have gone to extraordinary lengths to erase a moment of it. A midwife who should have been remembered for delivering a royal child may instead be remembered only as the ghost who vanished when the truth grew too dangerous. So let me ask you, if a midwife disappeared after Archie's birth, what does that tell us about what really happened that day? And more importantly, what secrets was she silenced to protect? Because the palace can hide records. They can edit birth certificates. They can stage photo ops. But they cannot silence science. And when DNA entered the picture, even the most carefully crafted illusions began to collapse. And that leads us to the next turning point in this saga. The moment when whispers gave way to proof, when rumors were confronted with cold, hard evidence. The DNA revelation that changed everything. What happens when speculation collides with science? When whispers, theories, and half-truths are suddenly backed, or shattered, by the cold, unforgiving results of a DNA test. That's the moment the Meghan Markle story turned from rumor to revelation. And it's here, in Chapter 5, where we dive into the DNA evidence that shook not just the walls of Buckingham Palace, but the very foundation of the monarchy's carefully curated narrative. For years, the palace could dismiss whispers. They could control the press, edit documents, silence staff. But DNA? DNA doesn't play politics. DNA doesn't care about royal titles or carefully scripted statements. DNA tells the truth, unvarnished, scientific, undeniable. And when those results emerged, the truth they carried wasn't just surprising, it was devastating. Let's start with how it allegedly happened. According to sources, concerns about Archie's lineage didn't just live online. They found their way into private palace corridors. Senior advisors, frustrated by inconsistencies, pushed for certainty. Behind closed doors, DNA testing was arranged, not once, but multiple times. Why? Because if you're going to challenge the biological ties of a royal child, you don't take chances. You triple-check. And reportedly, each test returned the same shocking conclusion. Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor does not share genetic markers with Meghan Markle. Think about the gravity of that. The palace, an institution that thrives on continuity and lineage, suddenly staring at scientific proof that the woman publicly hailed as Archie's mother wasn't biologically tied to him. What do you do with that kind of information? Do you bury it? Do you deny it? Or do you spin a narrative so powerful that the truth never has a chance to surface? And here's the contradiction that makes this revelation even more haunting. Meghan herself, in interviews, often spoke about her journey to motherhood. Her words were poetic, polished, yet often oddly detached. Critics pointed out that she never spoke of physical details with the same raw emotion as Diana or Kate. When Diana described William's birth, she recalled the pain, the weight, the exhaustion. Kate admitted to the struggles of morning sickness and postpartum recovery. Meghan, by contrast, often glossed over specifics, speaking instead in abstract terms about joy and gratitude, almost as if she were describing an experience she had rehearsed rather than lived. The DNA results put those polished words in a chilling new light. Because if Meghan wasn't Archie's biological mother, then her carefully curated story wasn't just incomplete, it was a fabrication. And in the court of public opinion, nothing stings more than deception. But how could these DNA results have leaked? That's where the intrigue deepens. Some insiders claim it wasn't the palace that first whispered the truth, it was Meghan's own extended circle. A former friend allegedly spoke to a biographer, hinting that Meghan had confided in her about fertility challenges and alternative paths to motherhood. Others suggest that Harry himself, in a moment of doubt, pushed for the tests. Imagine that, a father desperate for reassurance, only to be confronted with results that tore his world apart. And this is where the emotional beat hits hardest. Picture Harry, already estranged from his family, already caught between love and duty, staring at a piece of paper that tells him the child he has protected so fiercely may not even be connected to Meghan. What does that do to a man's sense of identity? To a father's heart? To a husband's trust? Here's where the irony cuts like a knife. Meghan and Harry position themselves as truth-tellers, rebels exposing the lies and hypocrisies of the monarchy. Yet if the DNA revelations are true, they were living a lie themselves, one that cuts deeper than any palace intrigue. Because this isn't just about succession or tradition. This is about the primal bond of motherhood, a bond the world was told Meghan had, but which DNA now suggests she never did. Ask yourself, how does a monarchy built on bloodlines survive when those bloodlines are called into question by science? How does the public reconcile their adoration for a royal baby when that baby's origin story may have been a carefully crafted illusion? And most importantly, how does Harry reconcile his role as both protector and victim in a deception that could define his family forever? And here's where the contradictions pile up again. The palace could have admitted to surrogacy. They could have explained it with dignity, even won sympathy for Meghan as a modern woman navigating fertility challenges. But instead, they chose secrecy. They chose deception. And in doing so, they set themselves up for disaster. Because once the DNA results surfaced, secrecy no longer protected them, it condemned them. According to those familiar with the leak, the DNA results didn't just reveal Meghan's absence in Archie's genetic makeup, they hinted at another mystery. If Meghan wasn't the biological mother, then whose DNA did Archie carry? Was it an anonymous surrogate chosen through an agency? Or was there someone closer, someone connected to the palace, whose involvement had to remain hidden at all costs? The implications are staggering. Because if the palace orchestrated not just a cover-up but an entire illusion of maternity, then this isn't just Meghan's deception. It's institutional deception. A monarchy complicit in rewriting biology itself to maintain its image. And this is where I put the question directly to you. What do you think is worse? The possibility that Meghan used a surrogate and lied about it? Or the possibility that the monarchy itself manipulated the narrative, using Meghan as a shield for a secret they were determined the world must never know? This DNA revelation didn't just open a crack in Meghan's story. It opened a chasm that swallowed trust, transparency, and tradition. And from that chasm rose a storm. Because if Meghan wasn't the mother, then every detail of Archie's birth was up for questioning. Every missing record, every silenced midwife, every contradictory statement suddenly made sense in a new, chilling way. But the storm didn't just rage inside the palace walls. It tore into Harry's private world. Because when the results were revealed to him, his reaction wasn't calm acceptance. It was chaos, anger, denial. A meltdown that insiders say shook his marriage, his family, and his already fragile place within the monarchy. And that, my friends, is where this story takes its most dramatic turn. Because when DNA proved what many had suspected all along, Harry didn't embrace the truth, he fought it. And his refusal to accept the evidence may have been the most destructive choice of all. What happens when the truth is too heavy to bear? When the evidence in front of you isn't just inconvenient, it threatens to rip apart your very identity. That was the storm Prince Harry faced when the DNA results were placed before him. And instead of acceptance, instead of clarity, what followed was chaos. A meltdown behind palace doors that insiders still whisper about to this day. Picture the scene. A quiet room, thick curtains drawn, the world outside carrying on as though nothing had changed. But inside, Harry is handed a document. Clinical, cold, merciless. Numbers, percentages, genetic markers. And the conclusion staring back at him. Archie does not share a biological connection with Meghan Markle. No maternal link. No comforting reassurance. Just the icy precision of science. Harry's first reaction wasn't grief. It was rage. According to sources close to the situation, he lashed out, accusing those who delivered the news of fabricating evidence, of conspiring against Meghan. He tore the papers apart, scattering them across the room, as though shredding the words would somehow erase their meaning. "This can't be true," he reportedly cried. "You're lying. You're trying to destroy us." It's not hard to imagine why Harry reacted this way. For years, he had built his identity on breaking free from palace control, on protecting Meghan from the cruelty he believed had killed his mother. To accept the DNA results would mean admitting that the very foundation of his marriage, the narrative of love, family, and shared sacrifice, was built on deception. And for Harry, already estranged from his brother, at odds with his father, and cut off from the only home he'd ever known, that was a truth too devastating to accept. Instead, he clung to denial. He insisted the tests were tampered with, that shadowy forces in the monarchy were trying to smear Meghan, to delegitimize Archie, to erase the family he had fought so hard to protect. In Harry's mind, the DNA revelation wasn't a scientific fact, it was a weapon, and he would do whatever it took to defend Meghan from its blade. But here's where the contradiction gnawed at him. Deep down, Harry had seen the same inconsistencies the public had. He'd noticed the odd secrecy around the birth, the missing medical records, the whispers among staff. He'd lived through Meghan's so-called pregnancy, watched her bump appear and disappear, fielded questions he couldn't comfortably answer. The signs were there. He just refused to look too closely. Because looking meant acknowledging the possibility that the world's whispers might be right. And acknowledging that meant facing a betrayal more personal than any he had ever endured. The emotional toll was enormous. Sources say Harry began lashing out not just at palace staff, but at family members who dared to hint at the DNA evidence. When William tried to approach him, perhaps out of concern, perhaps out of duty, Harry reportedly erupted, accusing his brother of jealousy, of trying to sabotage his marriage. "You never wanted me to be happy," Harry shouted, according to one insider. "You'll do anything to tear us down." But the truth is, this wasn't about William. It wasn't even about the monarchy. It was about Harry's desperate need to believe in Meghan, to believe in Archie, to believe that he had finally built a family free of the ghosts that haunted him since Diana's death. And when DNA threatened that belief, Harry chose illusion over reality. Isn't that the most human reaction of all? How many of us, faced with devastating truths, choose denial? How many of us tell ourselves comforting lies because the alternative is unbearable? Harry wasn't just fighting the palace. He was fighting himself, fighting the part of him that knew, deep down, that something was wrong. But denial comes at a cost. And in Harry's case, the cost was isolation. The more he denied, the more he pushed people away. His rants became angrier. His distrust grew sharper. Even Meghan, some say, struggled with the intensity of his reaction. Because while Meghan may have understood the DNA results, may have even anticipated them, Harry's meltdown threatened to tear apart the united front they had so carefully crafted. Imagine Meghan watching Harry spiral. On one hand, she needed his loyalty, his blind defense, his refusal to accept the whispers. On the other, his refusal to face reality only deepened suspicion. After all, what's more suspicious than a man screaming, "It's not true," at evidence no one outside the room has even seen? The irony here is brutal. Harry believed he was protecting Meghan and Archie by rejecting the DNA results. But in reality, his meltdown only drew more attention to them. His denial became its own kind of confession, a signal to insiders that the results had hit too close to home. Because if the evidence were truly false, wouldn't he have calmly disproved it? Wouldn't he have demanded an independent test, a transparent process? Instead, he exploded, attacked, and retreated. And in doing so, he confirmed to many that the DNA had revealed a truth he couldn't bear. And let's not forget the emotional scars this left. Harry's breakdown didn't just shake palace staff, it reverberated across his marriage. Meghan may have counted on his loyalty, but loyalty born of denial is fragile. What happens when the denial cracks? What happens when the illusion can no longer hold? Ask yourself this. Was Harry's meltdown the reaction of a man protecting his family, or the reaction of a man realizing, for the first time, that he had been deceived by the person he trusted most? One thing is certain. The DNA revelation didn't just expose Meghan's secret. It exposed Harry's deepest vulnerability, his desperate need to believe in love, even when love was built on lies. And that vulnerability made him unpredictable, volatile, dangerous even, to himself, to Meghan, and to the monarchy. Because the meltdown wasn't contained. Word of Harry's reaction leaked, as word always does in the palace. And once the courtiers realized the prince was rejecting science itself, the monarchy faced a new crisis. How do you protect an institution when one of its most public faces is crumbling under the weight of denial? That's when the palace moved from shock to survival mode. And their panic wasn't just about Harry. It was about what the world would think if the DNA truth ever got out. But what came next would push the monarchy into full-blown crisis management. Because when the palace scrambled to contain the fallout, they didn't just cover up. They confirmed, through their frantic behavior, that the DNA revelation was real. And the panic inside Buckingham Palace was about to spill over into the public eye. What does an institution built on centuries of control do when the one thing it cannot control, DNA, threatens to rip apart its foundation? It panics. Not openly, of course. Not in front of cameras or in the newspapers. But behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, the reaction to Archie's DNA revelation was nothing short of frantic. Chapter 7 is about that silent panic. The whispered meetings, the frantic phone calls, the desperate attempts to seal cracks before the entire monarchy crumbled. Imagine the scene inside the palace. The air heavy with tension, corridors buzzing with hushed voices, courtiers rushing with files clutched tightly to their chests. For centuries, the monarchy had survived wars, scandals, abdications. But this was different. Because unlike past scandals, this wasn't about behavior. It wasn't about affairs or money or even politics. This was about blood. And bloodlines are the monarchy's oxygen. Without them, the institution suffocates. The Queen had always insisted on strict adherence to protocol. Every royal birth came with bulletins, medical witnesses, public acknowledgement. But here, with Meghan and Archie, protocol had been broken. And now the palace was paying the price. If the DNA revelation spread beyond a handful of insiders, it wouldn't just tarnish Meghan. It would delegitimize Archie. It would call into question Harry's judgment. And worst of all, it would suggest that the monarchy itself had been complicit in deceiving the public. What do you do when truth is a greater enemy than rumor? You bury it. That's exactly what palace officials tried to do. According to sources, secret meetings were convened almost immediately. Senior courtiers sat down with lawyers, strategists, and media advisors. Their mission: contain the fallout. Keep the story locked in the shadows. Protect the crown at all costs. One aide reportedly suggested reframing the narrative. If whispers grew louder, the palace could lean into a sympathetic storyline. Meghan faced fertility struggles, and the couple turned to surrogacy. A modern solution for a modern couple. But that idea was shot down. Why? Because admitting to surrogacy now would mean admitting they had lied before. It would mean confessing that every staged photo, every glowing interview, every official statement had been an elaborate charade. And the monarchy couldn't survive another lie. Not after Diana. Not after Andrew. Not after decades of trust slowly eroding. So instead, they chose silence. A suffocating, deliberate silence. No statements. No clarifications. No acknowledgments. Just a refusal to engage, as though ignoring the fire would somehow extinguish it. But inside, panic spread. Staff whispered about the papers. Some claimed to have seen them. Others insisted the documents were locked in vaults. The uncertainty created a feverish paranoia. Who knew the truth? Who might leak it? And how long could they keep the walls from crumbling? Here's the irony. The very act of silence, meant to protect, only deepened suspicion. Reporters who asked questions were stonewalled. Records remained sealed. Doctors stayed anonymous. And every gap in the story became another piece of circumstantial evidence. Silence became its own confession. The emotional toll was immense. William, ever the heir, reportedly pressed for action. His argument was blunt. We cannot build a monarchy on lies. Charles, more cautious, urged restraint. And Harry? Harry was the wild card. Still in denial, still lashing out, he accused his own family of conspiring against Meghan. At one point, according to whispers, he stormed into a meeting, slamming his fist on the table, shouting, "You will not destroy my family with your lies." The irony, of course, was brutal. Because if the DNA evidence was true, it wasn't the palace lying. It was Meghan. Ask yourself this. How does a monarchy survive when its members aren't just divided, but at war with reality itself? On one side, an institution desperate to protect its lineage. On the other, a prince willing to torch everything to defend the woman he loves, even if it meant defending a lie. This clash of interests led to one of the strangest strategies in modern royal history: strategic distraction. While panic brewed behind the scenes, the palace began flooding the press with other stories. Kate's engagements were given extra spotlight. William's speeches were amplified. Even minor events were blown into headlines, all designed to drown out the whispers about Archie's DNA. It was a sleight of hand. Classic palace maneuvering. Look here, not there. Focus on the heir, ignore the spare. But leaks have a way of finding cracks. And the DNA story, no matter how hard they tried to bury it, kept resurfacing in whispers, in tabloids, in the murmurs of those too close to the truth to remain silent forever. And the harder the palace tried to cover it, the more people began to ask, what are they so afraid of us finding out? Here's where the emotional weight deepens. For centuries, the monarchy survived because people wanted to believe. Believe in the fairy tale. Believe in the bloodlines. Believe in the illusion of continuity. But what happens when the illusion breaks? When DNA says the fairy tale is fake? That's the nightmare the palace was confronting in its silent panic. And yet, amidst the chaos, one thought haunted the corridors more than any other. If Meghan wasn't Archie's mother, who was? Who was the woman hidden in the shadows, her role erased, her voice silenced? And what would happen if her identity ever came to light? Because panic doesn't just protect secrets. Panic leaves trails. And those trails point not just to what the palace wanted to hide, but to who they were trying to hide. And that brings us to the next explosive chapter, the media. Because when journalists caught the scent of blood, no amount of palace silence could stop them. They wanted answers. And their pursuit of the truth would push this scandal from whispers in palace corridors into headlines screaming across the world. What happens when the watchdogs of truth, the press, start sniffing around a story the palace would rather bury 6 feet under? When journalists, hungry for answers, collide with an institution determined to maintain silence. That's when we see one of the most aggressive, calculated media manipulations in modern royal history. Chapter 8 is about the blackout, the quiet war between reporters chasing the DNA story and the palace machine trying to strangle it before it ever reached the front page. From the moment Archie's birth was announced, questions piled up like storm clouds. Reporters wanted details: the hospital team, the time of delivery, the attending doctors. But instead of answers, they were met with stone walls. No names, no witnesses, just vague, sterile statements. And for journalists, vagueness is blood in the water. It screams, "There's something here we don't want you to see." Several prominent royal correspondents pushed harder. They filed requests for access to hospital records, citing the tradition of royal transparency. They reached out to Portland hospital staff, trying to secure even the most mundane confirmation that Meghan had been a patient. Yet what they found was nothing. Staff who normally would have basked in the glow of being part of royal history were mute. Some refused to return calls. Others whispered, "We can't talk about it." A few admitted they'd signed NDAs, binding them to silence. That in itself was shocking. NDAs for a royal birth? Unprecedented. What was the palace so desperate to hide? The blackout became obvious. Stories that began to surface were mysteriously pulled at the last moment. Drafts written by credible reporters never made it to print. Editors confessed, off the record, that they had been leaned on. Phone calls from palace press officers. Threats of blacklisting. Subtle reminders of access, that precious commodity reporters need to survive in the royal beat. Step out of line, and you're cut off. No invites to briefings. No quotes. No crumbs of insider information. For a journalist, that's career suicide. So stories were shelved. Whispers remained whispers. But here's the contradiction. In trying to kill the story, the palace only fertilized it. Every article that vanished, every editor who caved, became another piece of circumstantial proof. The palace wasn't just managing the press, they were silencing it. And in the age of social media, silence is a megaphone. And then came the manipulation. Instead of addressing the surrogacy whispers or the DNA leaks, the palace shifted focus. Suddenly, there were glowing articles about Meghan's charity projects, features about Harry's speeches, carefully staged photo ops of Meghan cuddling Archie, presenting the picture-perfect image of motherhood. It was classic misdirection. Flood the narrative with positivity to drown out the negativity. But here's the irony. Those glossy features didn't reassure people. They inflamed suspicion. Because when you spoon-feed the public polished images, they start asking, what are you hiding behind the smile? And Meghan's smiles, critics noted, often looked rehearsed, almost strained, as if she knew she was acting out a role rather than living it. The media manipulation wasn't just about what was printed, it was about what wasn't. Investigative reporters who dug too deeply found themselves reassigned. Tabloids that dared to mention moon bump videos or inconsistencies in Meghan's pregnancy timeline were slapped with legal threats. Lawsuits loomed over anyone who dared step too close to the truth. It was a chilling warning. Write about this, and we will destroy you. But you can't silence everyone. Whispers still leaked. Independent bloggers, YouTubers, and commentators filled the vacuum, dissecting every photo, every public appearance. They slowed down videos of Meghan's bump shifting. They compared birth certificate edits. They cataloged contradictions in timelines. And while mainstream outlets stayed quiet, the alternative media shouted louder. Millions watched. Millions listened. And the palace found itself in a nightmare. They had crushed the press, only to fuel a digital wildfire they couldn't control. Here's where it gets even darker. Insiders claim that at least one respected journalist did secure proof. Documentation suggesting Meghan had not been admitted to Portland Hospital on the day of Archie's birth. The story was ready. Explosive. But hours before it was due to run, it was killed. Not delayed. Not edited. Killed. The journalist, furious, later confided, I was told this story will never see the light of day. Ask yourself, what kind of institution fears transparency so much that it would rather bully, threaten, and censor than simply present the truth? If Meghan truly gave birth, wouldn't the palace have flaunted it, silencing critics with undeniable evidence? Instead, they weaponized silence, weaponized image, weaponized power. And in doing so, they confirmed what many already suspected. The official story was a lie. The blackout had another consequence, though, one the palace hadn't anticipated. It sowed doubt not just about Meghan, but about the monarchy itself. If they would lie about something as basic as a birth, what else had they lied about? What other truths had been buried beneath decades of pomp and ceremony? The crown, already tarnished by scandals, now looked complicit in something darker, manufacturing reality itself. And that's where the emotional gut punch comes in. Because this wasn't just a battle between Meghan and the media. It was a battle for trust. For centuries, people believed in the monarchy because it was supposed to represent continuity, stability, honesty. But now, those very foundations were being eaten away from within. The DNA revelations weren't just a private scandal. They were a public betrayal. And yet, even in this blackout, cracks appeared. Because one thing the palace couldn't control was Meghan's own circle. Friends, allies, and insiders who had once protected her began to turn. And their whispers weren't vague, they were damning. Because the biggest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from those closest to you. And that leads us to the next chapter. The moment when Meghan's carefully constructed facade began to unravel, not because of palace leaks or media investigations, but because of the very people who once swore loyalty to her. Friends who spilled secrets, allies who betrayed, and confidants who revealed the truth. What's more dangerous to someone guarding a secret? Enemies who dig, or friends who talk? The truth is, it's always the latter. Enemies can be dismissed as bitter, jealous, or malicious. But when whispers come from the people who once stood by your side, who shared your champagne toasts and late-night confessions, they cut deeper. They carry weight. They cannot be ignored. And in Meghan Markle's case, the friends who began to turn on her didn't just reveal gossip. They shattered the carefully crafted story of Archie's birth. Let's start with the obvious name, Jessica Mulroney. Once described as Meghan's ride or die, Jessica wasn't just a stylist and confidant. She was the woman Meghan leaned on during her rise from Hollywood actress to royal duchess. Their friendship was forged in glittering parties, long phone calls, and shared ambition. But ambition is a double-edged sword, isn't it? And when Meghan ascended into royalty, the balance shifted. Jessica went from equal to accessory. And when the cracks in their friendship widened, so too did the leaks. Insiders claim that Jessica, once fiercely protective, began dropping subtle hints to others in her circle. One particularly explosive claim came in a conversation allegedly overheard at a private event. Jessica remarked that Meghan had pulled off the performance of a lifetime during her so-called